Dear friends, Cards for Life practitioners, Gaians, here is another version of the presentation that I gave on the first Thinking Like Gaia call. This is a summary of the project, how the cards came into being, some of the kind of background, philosophy and inspirations for the project, and what I feel is the sort of the spirit or the essence of thinking like Gaia, more than the sum of the cards. So I'm going to share a few slides and string together some of these kind of key inspirations and background of the project. And I offer this to you as a set of inspirations and ideas for you to kind of connect with and weave together in your own way. So here we are, Cards for Life, Thinking Like Gaia practitioner training course. It was always intended to create a course to go with the cards. I'll give a little bit of background about the Cards for Life project. They started in 2022 in the summer. I was doing the Bio-Leadership Project fellowship. I chose to go into that fellowship and take a break from environmental consulting work, which I was feeling was somehow disconnected, and that there was a greater sensibility needed, at least in the areas where I was working, for systemic thinking, for relational thinking. And part of that sort of relational thinking, I think thinking sort of seems to speak more to the head and the mind. But when I talk about this sensibility for systems, it's really about attending to relationships and connecting inner and outer work. So in the area of greenhouse gas removal, where I was working, there was a lot of focus on what we could do to the environment and to the atmosphere. And I wanted to kind of come back to myself and think about how do we connect our intrinsic motivations and our inner work with that outer change that we wish to see in the world. And I think that's really like the primary inspiration for Cards for Life. And as you know, the cards have a kind of a personal and a collective side. And I'll come on to that in the presentation. But that was the inspiration for putting a card deck together. Also, as someone who loves to take walks in different knowledge fields, I found there was a great many different approaches to this sort of more beautiful world, the regenerative movement, the changes that many of us wish to see and be part of enacting in the world, from biomimicry and permaculture to teal organizations and more living systems informed approaches to organizational change. So many different areas that feel like they're pulling together, converging in a similar direction. And I wanted to collect up those ideas into an accessible format, really so that I could lay my hands on them and use them as a tool myself. I created the first prototype in the summer 22 and started playing with it gingerly with people, and it was quite well received. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to prototype this and make a batch of decks, get them out to people. So 50 packs went out to people all around the world in the autumn of 2022. As the Seasons and Cycles card has kept guiding this project, that was the first sort of harvest, the fruits of the first distillation of these ideas. I got lots of feedback through that winter. That feedback went into the soil, which is the book Thinking Like Gaia, which is an extended dive, a deeper dive into each card. And that kind of gave me the basis for launching the first sort of proper version, which is what you have, which came out in the spring of last year in 23. And that's gone terribly well. There's about 300 decks or more in over 20 countries. Some organizations are adopting them. And I'm really pleased to arrive here at this course, which is about deepening the practice of the cards and very much in the spirit of the cards, which is about participation and collective intelligence and figuring things out together. This feels like a really wonderful milestone to arrive at, with learning together about how to apply the cards and how to bring this living systems approach into our life and work. So I've said a bit about why cards. I love this Buckminster Fuller quote: "You cannot change how someone thinks, but you can give them a tool to use which will lead them to think differently." And I think what this quote encapsulates for me is that I really appreciate the approach of sort of bottom up and participatory sense making. There are lots of models and frameworks which are very valuable and really important and inspiring. And with a fixed framework and a fixed model, there tends to be something top down, something prescriptive. So we can learn about systems science, about living systems thinking, and be told many things about it. And what I want to do with Cards for Life is create a tool where we can define what these concepts mean for ourselves in our own contexts and do that together. And I think that's a complementary approach. And that's why the cards have some room in them. They ask questions, they've got space, they don't seek to definitively define a concept, but to invite you to define and apply it for yourself. So I love that Buckminster Fuller quote. And of course, he's a paragon of the sort of regenerative thinking movement. So there's 69 cards in 3 sets. They've been created through conversation and synthesis, not analysis. This idea of synthesis is about combining and connecting ideas. And rather than analysis, which seeks to sort of take ideas apart and categorize and order them, the creative process with generating Cards for Life has been inspired very much by the Bioleadership Project Fellowship and some of the great thinkers and leaders and authors that I was brought into contact with there. I often reference that the discomfort card from the Being deck was really born with a conversation with Bayo Akamalafe. And there was something about the spirit of his talk which really spoke to the importance of cracks and discomfort and breaking open. So that's one example. A very touching conversation with a friend shifted the empathy card to its true name, compassion. There are many other examples of how the cards kind of crystallized in my mind through conversation, through synthesis, through connecting ideas with other people. So while there has been an ordered process of putting them together, I enjoyed shuffling the potential cards in their sort of nursery in a spreadsheet for a long time. But it was through these kind of connected conversations that they crystallized. And there was a sense of order and wholeness to the deck that you have with you today. Life's dynamics are a synthesis, a collection of key concepts from system science, complexity, systems ecology, permaculture, and other related fields. But really, they're key concepts that define living systems, which are dynamic and constantly changing. And so that's why they're called that, dynamics. And then as I was creating the dynamics cards and sort of bringing together all of these key concepts, emergence, balance, disruption, I realized that actually some of them felt like they had a slightly different flavor, and those became the being cards. The being cards are about ways of being that can help us, qualities of being that can help us move with change, allow complexity, go through cycles of adaptation. So the being cards are meant to be in service of living life's dynamics, bringing them into our life and work. And in there, there's a synthesis of ideas from teal organizations, Laloux's thinking, or other stage theories. So sense and respond is one of the teal principles, for instance, but also Presencing Institute and some of these other movements in management consulting and organizational design are in there, and also some perennial principles from wisdom traditions like compassion, like gratitude. So the being cards are a synthesis of some of these more living systems informed movements in organizational change, and also some spiritual principles from perennial philosophies and wisdom traditions, and a spirit of mindfulness. The being cards are important as well because they're about checking in with how we're being before we move to the doing. So there's accepting and integrating the dynamic nature of life, and then being with that, and then doing. And it's usually in that order that the cards are used, that the doing at least comes after the being and the dynamics. And so when we've included ourselves, our personal states, in the system that we're participating in, then we can kind of move to action. And I think this is what we might call a kind of a regenerative approach. So the doing cards are a synthesis of approaches to regenerative action, life positive actions that we can take to enhance and increase the life in our world. Sometimes that means just allowing it, like the reconnecting card there has an image of a wildlife bridge, which is just allowing life to move where it wants to and needs to move. So rewilding also speaks to that. Biomimicry is in this deck. How can we take inspiration from how living systems have already designed in their emergent adaptive way and bring that into our designs of our built environment so that it might become more of a living and life, a space conducive to life, working with the seasons and cycles of the world. So that's the doing cards. So these three suits allow us to combine being, doing, and dynamics in many different ways to come up with new approaches. This spirit of combining and synthesis is a really key aspect of Cards for Life. What I like about a deck of cards is that they are combinatorial. We can shuffle the deck, we can pull out different combinations. Someone asked me early on in the project, this is all great, but what about just like the top 10 cards? And I really remember that moment because it showed me this kind of fork in the path, that going in that direction feels like the way that I don't want to do things, and speaks to something of kind of the old world, which is about a tick box activity of like, okay, got the top 10 regenerative ideas, remembered them, done, Cards for Life isn't a project to be completed in that way. It's a practice of combining, and it's in the relationships between the cards that new ideas are emerging. And so I couldn't help but have a Google in a nerdy way and find and just ask, how many unique 3-card combinations are there of a group of 69 unique elements? And that's 52,394 combinations of only 3 cards. So the 5-card combination below would be even more. That means if you took 3 cards 10 times a day, if you did 10 3-card readings a day, it would take you 30 years or more to get through the combination. So that's great because it means we can't control or map out everything that's going on here. But I hope knowing this helps us develop our tolerance for complexity and uncertainty and work with the practice of combining and just connecting with the context and the moment that we're in. So here is a couple of slides about the kind of the story, the philosophy, the moment that perhaps we find ourselves in. There are many great tellings of this story, but in brief summary here, and I think many of you are familiar with this, that for some reason I jumped a slide. I think that happened in the presentation. That the broader story, the story of separation, is one that maybe, hopefully, is breaking down and a new story is arising. And we're talking about that as regeneration, the environmental movement, putting well-being and life first. And that movement that's breaking down is this idea that the world, the story of separation, hopefully a story that we're beginning to transcend now, is that the world is a collection of objects. That fundamentally the reality is that life is made of a collection of parts. Petra Kunkel said, any sustainability challenges we're dealing with are actually the result of a fragmented way of thinking. And I think that quote encapsulates this view that the world is a collection of parts, of fragments. There are different readings of why we see the world in this way. I'm inspired by Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the different ways of attending to the world that come from the left and the right hemisphere. And There are evolutionary reasons for this. I like to think about the spotlight and the floodlight consciousness. And the spotlight, the left hemisphere, has evolved for us getting food and getting things done. And it often comes from a kind of scarcity modal, needing to acquire, needing to make safe, and needing to have resources and nourishment. And it's hyper focused, it's a very tight beam of awareness. And because it's a tight beam, it sees parts, sees things, and it wants to know what it can do, how it can have, what it can get from those things. And there's another kind of awareness, which is in an open mode, which is wiser in the sense that it knows it doesn't know everything. Its illumination fades out at the edges, and it has a sense of the greater expanse beyond what it can see, rather than that tight beam of focus. And I think it's that tight beam of focus that's driven by a sense of scarcity and needing to control and acquire, that has become amplified through technology. We've seen it blossom and burgeon through movements like the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, and get supercharged by mechanization and industrialism. But there's this other, gentler way of attending to the world, which is about relationships. So the parts have kind of exploded. It's like we've exploded our world into fragments, and now those fragments are falling back together. And in that process, we're attending more to the relationships between those parts to reweave this fabric. So Fridtjof Capra, systems view of life, has been a core inspiration for the project. He says, systems thinking is contextual, which is the opposite to analytical thinking. Analysis means taking something apart in order to understand it. Systems thinking means putting it into the context of a larger whole. And I think it's impossible to overstate the importance of this shift in our way of attending. And it's really important that systems thinking is recognized as a kind of a scientific approach. So it also meets that rational mind, which has become, very fragmented in its way of thinking. And systems science is really upending and changing that way of attending from a fragmenting, atomistic approach to something that's very connective, but in all the scientific disciplines. So we even see systems approach to psychology and personal development, a systems view of history. Of course, it's come out of ecology and our more mature understanding and study of the natural living world and of biological systems. And that's why I use the phrase living systems thinking, because living systems thinking is about systems thinking, and systems of relationships thinking, but based on the biological world and learning very much from the biological world and how it is a harmonious, coherent, converged fabric of relationships, and how we can learn to attune to that to connect and reconnect our world. So this is the story of interbeing and one of convergence. And it's this that I hope the cards can be a tool to support. This picture really, as pictures do, communicates 1,000 words, I think. So I won't try and explain the picture. But I add this quote by Nora Bateson: "The most important task of this moment is to generate a base of people who are eager to practice perceiving the complexity and interdependency in every aspect of our lives." I really love this quote, and it's one to sit with and to come back to. And this image also, it's wiggly outside. I like this verb. There's something in language as well, which is about a shift from nouns to verbs. In many oral cultures and oral traditions, the words of the language tend to be much more action and process oriented, or like verbs rather than nouns, things, parts. So when we move from whole to wholing as a process of bringing together, of making more whole, actually the integration card says continuously becoming more whole. So to think of that as a cumulative developmental process, wholing, supporting forms of reconnection. There are some wonderful frameworks out there, I think, that are really clear and solid, like in Laura and Giles' book, Regenerative Leadership, they talk about 4 fundamental forms of reconnection: parts and wholes, left and right brain, masculine and feminine. And there's a 4th, which doesn't come to mind right now. Maybe it's in this list. Inner and outer work, connecting the self and the world. A complementary part of that, I think, is intrinsic and extrinsic. What's good just because it feels good to do and is intrinsically motivated, and what's motivating us because it's a change out there. And I think alignment between those 2 things is also a good way of thinking about inner and outer work. What feels right to do and what's needed by the larger systems that we're participating in. Humans and nature, of course, as Cards for Life say, we are nature. Self and world, us and Gaia. And this understanding that we don't come into the world, we're not parts on the surface of a ball. We come out of the world in a way that apples come out of an apple tree. Left and right hemispheres. I've mentioned about this with Ian McGilchrist. Parts and relationships. It's not to say that the world isn't a collection of objects and that it is a fabric of relationship. Of course, it's both of those things. And I think it's holding that and knowing that we can switch those modes is the sort of complex, nuanced part of this change. And that I feel that what feels important to me in this time in the world is attending more to the relationships because we've attended so much to the parts. Story and science. Science in the reductive sense of data, factual information, of logos. Story in the sense of poetry and feeling and quality, that can't be turned into data. And that's the mythos, the story that we're living. So all of these forms of convergence, I feel, are very alive in our time. And in some way, the cards speak to these different forms of convergence and many more, I'm sure, that you can think of. This slide is about science and spirituality. That's one way we might talk about this. Duality, I like the shift from dualities to complementarities. I think that's also part of the shift, that, you know, the split between mind and body, the sort of dark Cartesian dualism is now being healed and is converging. And system science and spirituality have the same precept, the same fundamental understanding. I think this is what feels very exciting to me. And actually, Jeremy Lent spoke about this at length in The Web of Meaning, that system science says that the relationships are more fundamental than the parts. That's what binds reality together. And that's how new parts and new relationships emerge from combinations, from synthesis. Spirituality broadly says, many wisdom traditions say that there is a kind of spiritual energy that flows through and connects all things. Qi from the Taoist tradition would be one conception of that. And there are many, many other conceptions. Spirit, soul, these ideas that there is a connective energy. Even modern physics recognizes this, and as quantum physics matures in its understanding and comes more and more into our consciousness, we also realize that things are both parts and wholes, and they are all connected. So this convergence of the spiritual and the scientific also feels a very profound moment to participate in and support the convergence. So mythos and logos, they can sound a little bit dry, maybe, these words, but I like the flavor of them and the rhyme of them. And mythos is about the story and logos is about the information. And so one side of the card, thinking about that as the mythos, here, all good things not come to an end, but give way to the new. You might notice on some of the cards I've paraphrased or subverted some traditional sayings. So this idea that all good things do come to an end and give way to the new is the kind of cyclical thinking of a new story that is more resonant with into being. And then the logos would be the questions that we can ask to acquire and get information and apply the cards, the concepts outwardly. So that's this idea that the cards have these two dimensions as well and help with this convergence. And I should say here that the book, which is a work in progress, Thinking Like Gaia, the logos is pretty well done, which is a deeper dive into all of the cards and some extra resources and some factual contextualizations of the concept. The mythos, which I've written for a few of the cards, is a story to illustrate that concept and it being lived in the world. And so I imagine that as a collection almost of sort of didactic stories that explore the concepts and speak to that side of our way of being and our way of attending. Living the questions. There are a few questions here, offered them into the material for the course, and some that we'll be exploring through the Thinking Like Gaia course. But I just highlight this one at the bottom. How is life loving itself through me? I like this question because it helps us think about parts and wholes in an integrated way. I am a part. I do have this experience of I am, and life as a greater whole, a greater part, the planet, Gaia, is in a sense moving through me. When I connect and I feel like I'm in tune with the greater system of life, then that part and whole thinking is true on multiple scales. I'll try and illustrate it with these slides. Are we doing it, or is it doing us? Is the world happening to us, or are we happening to it? I think that comes from the kind of story of separation thinking. Is change happening from the outside in or the inside out? Similar. Like Alan Watts said, you are something the whole world is doing, in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. And I think that's an elegant way of capturing the multiple scale reality. What if we asked, how would Gaia do this? Or if we asked, how is life loving itself through me? The Nested Systems card speaks to this conception of multiple scales of reality, zooming in and out at the same time. We have cells in our body which are themselves whole, in a body which is itself whole, but also a part of a larger body, a community, a species, Gaia, which itself is a whole, but also a part of the solar system, and so on. And I think there's something about this that is part of our stretch in this time and our stretch in the way of thinking like Gaia, because we're used to definitive categories on a single scale. But this multi-scale thinking is part of how we can connect to a greater whole and a greater purpose without sort of losing our sovereignty either. Yeah. So this is the spirit of thinking like Gaia that I want to explore with you all, and I want the cards to be able to support. Bringing that down to earth a little bit and thinking about the application of some of these ideas that may feel lofty is language for life. That card is a portal to this aspect of the project, that a systems informed, an interbeing informed, a collapse informed vocabulary is what I've sought to bring together and to offer with Cards for Life. And this kind of systems informed, living systems informed vocabulary, this regenerative vocabulary, I hope that during your time in the course and broadly working with the cards is something that you can make your own. You know, define what emergence means to you and what potential means to you. May Cards for Life support you as a regenerative vocabulary to cultivate greater cycle awareness, collapse awareness, and developmental processes that emerge rather than get built from the outside. So There's more to say about that, but I don't want to labor this here. I could feel myself going down the emergence rabbit hole and talking about that concept. But yeah, just to say that this is a vocabulary that is complexity informed and systems informed. And I hope that it can help us think in this multi-scalar way and support our ways of converging so many forms of separation, which are causing suffering and undermining the life of the world. I'll end with an endorsement by someone, which I just really appreciate the tone and the clarity of. Cards for Life serve a very important function. They don't just illuminate universal principles of living systems. Their use in workshops and guided conversations encourages people to reflect on and apply them in the context of a specific idea or project. In this way, regeneration ceases to be an abstract concept and instead becomes a very real way of re-examining beliefs and attitudes about how the world works. Through this course, we're going to explore the 4 exercises that come with your Cards for Life pack. In this multi-scalar way, self and world, it's important to develop a personal practice with these cards and just use them in your own reflective practice, whether that's journaling or just bringing them into conversations with friends and family. And then from there, we can build outward to learn to sort of host circles and run workshops and exercises with broader groups and teams or in our professional practice. Thanks for listening. Let's play with the cards. Do remember to just have fun with them. Leave them on your desk. Allow them to come into conversation. Sometimes I feel myself get quite serious with these ideas, but a spirit of play and playfulness and experimentation and holding it a bit lightly is really important. Really important too. I think if we're going to succeed in the transformations that we hope to see, then we can't do it without some spirit of play. So thank you for listening. It's really a wonderful opportunity that I'm so grateful for, to have the time and the space and your attention to practice articulating and synthesizing these ideas. If you want to talk about anything in this presentation, the project broadly, just reach out to me. I'm here for that conversation always. Okay, go well.